A huge
Yeah.
and warm welcome to each and every one of you. If we have someone who's willing to say a prayer, Sandra, is that you putting your hand up?
Yes, I was. Just let me get out of a pickle. I've managed to drop something on the.
I'm imagining literally sitting inside a jar of pickle, which is giving me joy. As long as you're not uncomfortable in a jar of pickle. Slightly ridiculous.
I don't think they make them that big. Oh my God, oh my God. Verily I invoke thee and supplicate before thy threshold, asking thee that all thy mercies may descend upon these souls. O Lord, dilate the breasts through the signs of thy oneness, and make all mankind as stars shining from the same height of glory, as perfect fruits growing upon the tree of life. Verily thou art the Almighty, the self-subsistent, the giver, the forgiving, the pardoner, the omniscient, the one creator. Abdul Baha.
Thank you very much, dear Sandra, for that beautiful prayer to get us into the mood. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for another installment of God Passes By. I'm going to give you a quick recap as to what happened last session. So we were talking about the Bab in this period where he's in the mountains of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan obviously has these two prisons, Marku and Chehre. Now in this prison time, we realized that the Bab spent 3 years there. He revealed a lot of the laws. The Persian Bayan was written there. We had the conference of Badash that took place. We also had the martyrdom of the Bab soon to be coming as well. We know that the Bab declares in Tabriz, sitting in the chair of the soon-to-be Nasruddin Shah. A lot of people kick off and they're really upset with the teachings of the Bab and they try and attack them. The Babis respond. They start writing these treaties, but some people accept, some people decide not to. They're not interested in listening. We learned a little bit about Jabal Gha and Jabal Sa, these magical places that are underground where the Ghaem was in hiding, apparently. Baha'u'llah explains later that these are actually spiritual interpretations and they're metaphors, and how from Jabal Gha there's 1,000 gates and there's all these good things that will come, and how every prophet in a sense has come from there, and this is a spiritual thing that brings divine blessings. We also learned a little bit about the Kitab Bihara, which is this book of traditions essentially that come mainly from the 6th Imam Jafar Sadiq and his father Bagher. So there's a lot of traditions in there that refer to the Ghaib. We know that Muhammad Shah passes away, and obviously Haji Mirza Agassi, the prime minister now, is going to be switched as the new king comes in, Nasruddin Shah, and he brings Mirza Taghi Khan. Mirza Taghi Khan wanted to stamp his seal on what's going on, and he decides to ramp up all the persecutions against the Bab. This is when the Babis are now really sort of being persecuted. So we discussed this movement of Mullah Hussein from Mashhad going all the way to the Jazirah Khazra, the Verdant Isle. The Bab has summoned Mullah Hussein to take a course of action. He sends his turban to Mullah Hussein. He also calls him Sayyid Ali, and he says, you now will go along. On the way, he stops in Nishapur, where we have Badi's father, who has this satchel full of turquoise. He used to own a turquoise mine, so he discards this satchel. As they're going along, more and more people are joining until they reach their 202, this number that's spoken of. Now, what's important about 202? 202 has the same abjad value as Ali Muhammad, the name of the Bab. So Sayyid Ali Muhammad, it's the same abjad value as him. It also has the same abjad value as the word for Lord in Arabic, which is Rab, which is spelled Abi. So it's very significant, this number 202. They get to what is known as their Verdant Isle, which is known to be the province of Mazandaran and Fort Sheikh Tabasi. This is what's been called the Verdant Isle through the eyes of the Babis. And here they try and get the help of Qaddus, who they knew was going to be one of the leaders as well. They end up being attacked. The Sayyid Ulama, one of the highest mujtahids in a town called Bafarush, which is now known as Babul, he basically has great issue with Mullah Hussein coming through. This is when we know that they try to shoot the Babis. They kill 6 of them. Only when the 7th one is killed does Mullah Hussein agree that they will now go forward. The reason it's 7, because the name of the Bab, Ali Muhammad, has 7 letters in it. So each person was a sacrifice for his name. They then go forward and they start repelling the armies. This is where Mullah Hussein cuts through the man, the tree, and the muskets in one fell swoop. They end up going to this caravanserai. They stand up to do the azan, the call to prayer. And the first person stands up, he starts saying it, he's shot. The next one stands up, is shot. The third one, the same. But such is the respect to these prayers. Bear in mind, they are basically Muslims who are absolutely in love with Islam and are now espousing this new faith. After this, we have the battle within Fort Sheikh Tabasi, which is roughly in this area here. And the Battle of Fort Sheikh Tabasi, basically we have 313 people inside the fort to begin with. The number then carries on as people keep dying and going, and everyone on the side of the government basically are trying to kill the Babis. They're trying to crush them. They circle the fort and they try to create all these attacks. Lo and behold, this battle takes place for roughly 11 months, in which we see Mullah Hussein predict his own martyrdom and get shot and killed. And then a whole bunch of other Babis are starving. They end up trying to eat the leather from the shoes, from the saddles. They end up digging up Mullah Hussein's horse and eating that, crushing the bones to make flour. They end up eating grass, a whole bunch of things, horrible atrocities that happen. Eventually, it's put forward to Quddus by the seal that's put on the Quran and swearing on the Holy Quran. If they come out, everyone will be allowed to go home. Quddus knew full well that this was not going to happen. But still, he agrees to come out. A lot of them are massacred, horrible things with spears, swords, they're cut in half, they're shot, strapped to cannons, and they have cannonballs that go through them. We know that whilst in the fort of Sheikh Tabasi, Quddus wrote something that's basically 3 times longer than the Quran. He wrote the Sada Samad, he wrote this tafsir, which is this incredible piece of work. We know that of the letters of the living that were there, half of them are killed. So there's a lot of death that takes place, and sure enough, Quddus has predicted his own wedding 3 years prior to this. Quddus is taken back to his hometown of Barfarush, or as I said, is now known as Babul. And here he is attacked with knives, with axes. The people execrate on him. They cut him into pieces and throw his body into a fire. And this is exactly 3 years on from when he said that he would have his wedding in the square of his hometown. We then went on to Nayriz, and we know that this period was a lot shorter than the Battle of Fort Sheikh Tabasi. This took place in Fort Khaja near Chinar Sukhde. The main person involved, Sayyid Yahya, also known as Vahid, who was the wisest man in the country. He's the person who's at the head. The people against him are Zainul Abidin Khan and Abdullah Khan. So again, this similar battle happens down in Nayriz, which is close to here. This is Nayriz. Many, many people are killed. Incredibly brutal, horrible, horrible things happen. They kill Vahid by taking his turban off him. He was a Sayyid, his green turban. They wrap it around his neck, and then they drag him through the streets. They then decide to cut Vahid's head off. They decapitate the body, they take the head, and they stuff it full of straw. The body is then, again, just left in the streets, and there's dancing and drums and cymbals around him. The men, the women, and the children are then put on donkeys. A lot of the Babi women and children, some of them are naked, and they're taken through to see all their dead husbands and fathers. And you'll see the punishments that they had there in Nayriz, where they had their nails pulled out, they had spikes put in their hands, they were tied to trees, and they were shot at repeatedly, and they were lashed, and they had piercings put through their nose and dragged as well. So horrible atrocities. Then we have Zanjan, the third big battle that takes place. The Battle of Zanjan was worse than the other two. The people, the main protagonists of Zanjan are someone by the name of Hujat and also Zainab. Hujat was this remarkable character who was very well versed in the Quran. His sister-in-law actually was the beautiful Zainab, who was also known as Rustam Ali, who as a female, she cuts her hair and she decides to go into battle. And she was there for about 5 months. Remarkable stories of her dedication and the fact that she would only sleep for a few hours with her hand on top of her sword and her head resting on it and a shield, always ready to defend the Babis. We know that the chief protagonists against Hujat and all the Babis there were Amir Aslan Khan, who was the uncle of Nasruddin Shah, and Muhammad Khan, a military leader. So within this fort of Ali Mardan, there was Ali Mardan Khan, there were 3,000 people that were inside this fort. So it was a very, very large event. We know that roughly 1,800 people were killed as a result of it. Hujat had told everyone to calm down the entire time. Before Hujat's passing, he writes this letter to the powers in charge and says, "Look, we love Iran. We want nothing but the progress of Iran, and we really want to help." This letter was intercepted. The words were changed to make Hujat seem like he was against it. The women involved in this battle in Zanjan, basically, they were absolutely remarkable, like the women across everywhere. And in this battle in Zanjan over here, they would cut off their hair and they would tie it to guns and they would do whatever they can. We know that when eventually Hojat is killed, just after seeing his wife be killed and his son be killed, he is buried. The body is hidden. They trick his 7-year-old son saying, look, we want to take this body up and we want to revere it as much as we can. They then do horrible things to the body of Hojat. The Babis there are tortured via things such as boiling oil, their heads being put in boiling oil, through the use of treacle being smeared on them and then left outside to be eaten by the birds, and then cannons, and then again being dipped in cold water and then being lashed severely. So we learn about all these things taking place. And we're going to carry on. So that's a very gruesome period, but these 3 years spent in the region of Azerbaijan, which we know is in the northwestern region up here, predominantly the Babis and Marku, and then Chehrek further down here. Unless there's any comments or questions, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask Mr. Simon Batchelor to continue us on our journey.
To the tide of calamity which, during the concluding years of the Bab's ministry, was sweeping with such ominous fury the provinces of Persia, whether in the east, in the south, or in the west, the heart and center of the realm itself could not remain impervious. 4 months before the Bab's martyrdom, Tehran in its turn was to participate, to a lesser degree and under less dramatic circumstances, in the carnage that was besmirching the face of the country. A tragedy was being enacted in that city, which was to prove but a prelude to the orgy of massacre which, after the Bab's execution, convulsed its inhabitants and sowed consternation as far as the outlying provinces. It originated in the orders and was perpetuated under the very eyes of the irate and murderous Amir Nizam, supported by Muhammad Khan Kalantar and aided by a certain Hussein, one of the ulamas of Kashan. The heroes of that tragedy were the 7 martyrs of Tehran, who represented the more important classes among their countrymen, and who deliberately refused to purchase life by that mere lip denial which, under the name of taqiyya, Shia Islam had for centuries recognized as a wholly justifiable and indeed commendable subterfuge in the hour of peril. Neither the repeated and vigorous intercessions of highly placed members of the professions to which these martyrs belonged, nor the considerable sums which, in the case of one of them, the noble and serene Haji Mirza Said Ali, the Bab's maternal uncle, affluent merchants of Shiraz and Tehran were eager to offer as ransom, nor the impassioned pleas of state officials on behalf of another, the pious and highly esteemed dervish Mirza Ghorban Ali, nor even the personal intervention of the Amir Nizam, who endeavored to induce both of these brave men to recant, could succeed in persuading any of the 7 to forego the coveted laurels of martyrdom. The defiant answers which they flung at their persecutors, the ecstatic joy which seized them as they drew near the scene of their death, the jubilant shouts they raised as they faced their executioner, the poignancy of the verses which, in their last moments, some of them recited, the appeals and challenges they addressed to the multitude of onlookers who gazed with stupefaction upon them, the eagerness with which the last 3 victims strove to precede one another in sealing their faith with their blood, and lastly, the atrocities which a bloodthirsty foe degraded itself by inflicting upon their dead bodies, which lay unburied for 3 days and 3 nights in the Sabzi Maidan, during which time thousands of so-called devout Shias kicked their corpses, spat upon their faces, pelted, cursed, derided, and heaped refuse upon them. These were the chief features of the tragedy of the 7 martyrs of Tehran, a tragedy which stands out as one of the grimmest scenes witnessed in the course of the early unfoldment of the faith of Baha'u'llah. Little wonder that the Bab, bowed down by the weight of his accumulated sorrows in the fortress of Sharik, should have acclaimed and glorified them in the pages of a lengthy eulogy which, immortalized their fidelity to his cause, as those same 7 goats who, according to Islamic tradition, should, on the day of judgment, walk in front of the promised Qa'im, and whose death was to precede the impending martyrdom of their true shepherd.
To pause there, so we're saying after these 3 big battles that have taken place in the fort of Sheikh Tabasi, in Neres, and in Zanjan, we now turn our directions towards Tehran. And what's happened in Tehran, in the capital? We have the 7 martyrs of Tehran. One of them, who was, of course, the Bab's uncle, Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali. We had Mirza Ghorban Ali Barfarushi. We had Haji Mullah Ismail Ghami. We had Agha Sayyid Hussein Tarshizi. We had Haji Muhammad Taghi Karamani, Agha Sayyid Murtaza Zanjani, and also Agha Muhammad Hussein Maraghi. So these 7 amazing souls, there's this story that's told within the Dawnbreakers, how they're taken and they're going to be killed. Now, it mentions in God Passes By this word Taghiya. Now, Taghiya is something that in Shia Islam, where you're allowed to save yourself by saying you are not a Muslim, as I understand it. So if you're going to be attacked, if someone's coming to kill you, you can actually say, no, this isn't my faith, only to preserve your life. This is something that the Babis have ruled out. That is something that's not applicable, that they can't do as Babis. Interestingly enough, one person that was allowed to do this was somebody by the name of Mirza Ahmad, who was one of the amanuenses of the Bab while he was up in Markul. And he was allowed to practice Taghiya because he had the bulk of the writings of the Bab. And if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have the majority of the writings. So it was said to him that he was allowed to do that purely and simply to preserve the writings that we had there. So these 7 are martyred, and it makes reference to this. It then finally ends up talking about the 7 goats. Okay, so what are these 7 goats according to Islamic tradition? This book that I've mentioned several times is a book that's compiled of many traditions, and we know again they come in predominantly from Imam Sadiq Jafar, the 6th Imam of Shia Islam, and Bagher, his father. And in there it talks about these 7 goats basically being slain. And what are goats usually used for in pilgrimage and in these situations? They are a sacrifice. So it's predicted that before the Qa'im has his journey, that this is what's going to happen, that 7 of them are going to die. And this apparently is a fulfillment of the 7 goats. We now go on to chapter 4, which deals with the execution of the Bab. If some of you haven't read this story, I'm sorry to break the news, but the Bab was executed. We're going to go into some of the details of that, some very, very touching things that this goes into.
The waves of dire tribulation that violently battered at the faith and eventually engulfed in rapid succession the ablest, the dearest, and most trusted disciples of the Bab, plunged him, as already observed, into unutterable sorrow. For no less than 6 months, the prisoner of Chehreg, his chronicler has recorded, was unable to either write or dictate. Crushed with grief by the evil tidings that came so fast upon him, of the endless trials that beset his ablest lieutenants, by the agonies suffered by the besieged and the shameless betrayal of the survivors, by the woeful afflictions endured by the captives and the abominable butchery of men, women, and children, as well as the foul indignities heaped on their corpses, he for 9 days, his amanuensis has affirmed, refused to meet any of his friends, and was reluctant to touch the meat and drink that was offered him. Tears rained continually from his eyes, and profuse expressions of anguish poured forth from his wounded heart as he languished for no less than 5 months, solitary and disconsolate in his prison. The pillars of his infant faith had for the most part been hurled down at the first onset of the hurricane that had been loosed upon it. Ordus, immortalized by him as Esmalahi al-Khair, the last name of God, on whom Baha'u'llah's tablet of Kulut Ta'am later confirmed the sublime appellation of Nuqteye Ukhra, the last point,
whom he elevated in another tablet to a rank second to none except that of the herald of his revelation,
whom he identifies in still another tablet with one of the messengers charged with imposture, mentioned in the Quran, whom the Persian Bayam extolled as that fellow pilgrim, round whom mirrors to the number of 8 of our heads
revolve,
on whose detachment and the sincerity of whose devotion to God's will God prideth himself amidst the concourse on high, whom Abdul-Bahar designated as the moon of guidance,
and whose appearance the revelation of St. John the Divine anticipated as one of the 2 witnesses, into whom, ere the second woe is past, the spirit of the life from God must enter.
Such a man had in the full bloom of his youth suffered in the Sabza Maidan of Barfurush, a death which even Jesus Christ, as attested by Baha'u'llah, had not faced in the hour of his greatest agony. Mullah Hussein, the first letter of the living, surnamed the Babul Bab, the gate of the gate, designated as the primal mirror, on whom eulogies, prayers, and visiting tablets of a number equivalent to thrice the volume of the Quran had been lavished by the pen of the Bab, referred to in these eulogies as beloved of my heart, the dust of whose grave that same pen had declared was so potent as to cheer the sorrowful and heal the sick, whom the creatures raised in the beginning and in the end of the Babi dispensation envy and will continue to envy till the day of judgment, whom the Kitab-e-Egan acclaimed as the one but for whom God would not have been established upon the seat of his mercy, nor ascended the throne of eternal glory, to whom Sayyid Kazem had paid such tribute that his disciples suspected that the recipient of such praise might well be the promised one himself. Such a one had likewise, in the prime of his manhood, died a martyr's death at Tabarsi.
I'm going to pause you there because there's some kind of complicated things to work through here. And I'm going to do my best to try and explain as much as I can my understanding of it. So firstly, we know that when His Holiness the Bab had found out what had taken place, especially at Fort Sheikh Tabarsi, he was so grief-stricken. It says that for no less than 6 months was he able to write or dictate. We also know for 9 days he didn't eat or drink, and tears rained continually for his eyes. And for 5 months he was basically solitary, disconsolate in prison. So it was a really, really tough time for the Bab. He had lost Qaddus, he'd lost Mullah Hussein, half the letters of the living, and the unfairness of what's taken place was something that was really touching. We then hear about Qaddus. Now, Qaddus is known as the Ismailahil Akhar, so the last name of God is a title given to him. He's also known as the Noqta Akhra. This means the last point. And it's very interesting that we have the Bab, who's known as the primal point, and Qaddus is known as the last point, such as the station of Qaddus. It really goes deep. Then we start talking about his revelation, who he identifies. So Baha'u'llah in this tablet that he's written, the tablets of all food, he then goes on to say that he's giving Qaddus this other whole station. He's making reference to what's known as the heart of the Quran, which is Surah 36 in the Quran, the Surah of Yasin. In Yasin, it basically talks about 2 individuals, 2 apostolic figures, 2 rasuls, 2 messengers who had come. And there are these things that are kind of recurrent themes. So these 2 were there and they're going to be regenerated. And they come and they're basically squashed. They're stamped out. They were charged with being impostors. And it says that they will be regenerated. And the understanding that's explained by Baha'u'llah is that these 2 people actually that refers to, the first one of the 2 refers to His Holiness the Bab. The second one is Qaddus, completely taking Qaddus to this other level of almost of being this messenger, which is very, very, very touching. Abdul-Bahar designates him as the moon of guidance, which I find so beautiful. And the analogy, as far as I can see, of why you'd be the moon of guidance. In the night, what guides us? What natural light guides us? The moon. So if we see His Holiness the Bab was up in Azerbaijan, he's in prison, there's not much he can do or say. Qaddus is out in the field, and Qaddus there in Fort of Sheikh Tabarsi, and he's essentially reflecting the light of the sun. The moon reflects the light of the sun and then sheds it onto the world. And in this, I guess the sun would be the Bab, whose light is reaching Godus and then Godus is spreading it. So the moon of guidance, such beautiful, beautiful words that it refers to. Then we go on to this, and whose appearance the revelation of St. John the Divine anticipated as one of the two witnesses, into whom ere the second woe is past, the spirit of life from God must enter. Now, what is this referring to? This comes from the revelation of St. John, which we know to be the 27th book of the New Testament, the last book. We don't know if it's the same John as comes from the Gospel or not, but either way, there's some debate over that. Now, in here, it talks about these two witnesses that came, proclaimed, and were martyred. Now, Abu Bahai explains in some answered questions that the first of these was none other than the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the second one was Ali. It then goes on to say that they would be regenerated in the year 1260, which relates to 1844. It's then said that the first is the Bab, and the second of these regenerated witnesses is Godus. Such is the station of Godus being elevated, absolutely mind-blowing. It then mentions these three woes, two of which happened, and the third one will happen quickly after. Here it's explained that the first woe was Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The second woe was the holiness, his Bab, and the third was Baha'u'llah. There's a lot of references that are taken and that come in there, but it's all talking about the stations, basically, about this beautiful station of Godus, who's so very elevated. We then go on to Mullah Hussein, who's the Bab-ul-Bab, who's the gate of the gate, who's designated as the primal mirror, and the eulogies that come through, and especially this from the Bab, where he talks about beloved of my heart, is what he says to him, the dust of whose grave that same pen has declared was so potent as to cheer the sorrowful and heal the sick. This is like a love story that's unfolding before us as we start to understand the stations of the various people. And then in the Kitab-i-Iqan, it goes on to say that God would not have been established upon the seat of his mercy, nor ascended the throne of eternal glory, if it wasn't for Mullah Hussein. And then, of course, we have Sayyid Kazim's tribute, which we know from the very beginning, Mullah Hussein had written to Sayyid Kazim from Isfahan when he'd won the support of Haji Sayyid Muhammad Baqir, this very eminent ecclesiastical leader, and Sayyid Kazim pays this tribute that some people think maybe he is indeed the Ghaya.
My recollection from the hand of the cause, Mr. Khadim, and it's not listed here in God Passes By, but he said that, I believe the Guardian it was, said that the distillation of Islam, the whole purpose underlying Islam was the appearance of its fruit. And its fruit was that pure soul, Mullah Hussein. That was the purpose underlying Islam. And I also believe that this is correct, that had not the Bab declared himself Qaim, that Qudus would have been in that role.
Thank you for sharing that, Rick. Whether that last point is literal or symbolic of his greatness, who knows? We are very blessed to have our scholar, Dr. Khaza Fanan Pazir, here with us. Mr. Fanan Pazir, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
Exactly right. That, you see, let me quickly to say, in the Holy Quran, there's a chapter 55 as well as chapter 36, Dave. We're learning a lot about our past revelations. In that book, it says the first thing God did was to teach the Quran. So there are three verses, one after the other. The first one is to teach the Quran. Then the second one is to create man. And then the third thing he did, God, was to teach the man thus created the Bayan. So here's the sequence, dearest Dave. First, God teaches, allama, muallim, as you said, teaches, expounds the Quran. That's chapter 55 of the Quran, Surah Rahman. So the first thing that God does, to teach the Quran. Then he decides, God, to create something called insan, which they translate as man, with the capital M. And then God teaches the man thus created the Bayan. This is confirming what Mr. Khadim said. So the question is this: God teaches the Quran, Dave. Who does he teach it to before creating man? Well, in Islamic commentary, they say he teaches it to the angels. But then the angels don't need to know about how to wash your hands, how to have Islamic Sharia, how to know about the stories of the 27 prophets. This, Then they say sometimes maybe the verses could go forward and backward. But then Dave, they can't do that because the verses are in a particular sequence. First, the teaching of the Quran. Second, Dave, the creating of man, insan, and then the teaching the man thus created, thereby created, the bayan. So when the Bab, His Holiness the Bab, addresses Mullah Hussein, he said, Innaka antal insan. You are that insan that was created to receive the Bayani revelation. So that makes sense. In other words, as a result of progressive revelation, 6,000 years, inclusive of the Quranic revelation, then you have an insan, a human reality, with a consciousness, with a susceptibility, with a potentiality, as Nabil says, of receiving the bayan. So he's the gate of the gate. He's an incredible position. And so what Mr. Khadim, in his commentaries and his lectures and so on, we'll have to go to them in detail, has said is absolutely true. And of course, the station of Qudus, the more you figure it out, you realize one can't figure it out. It's really the Nuqta Ukhra, Ismullah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fanan Abbasir, for that.
Also, just to add to that, I think there's a writing where it says that the souls that return, I think Abdul Baha says, is the souls that return to each revelation are the return of previous souls, qualities and attributes of previous souls that have been. And I think it's mentioned that Mullah Hussein is actually the return of Muhammad in terms of qualities and attributes, as well as Tahira being the return of Fatima and Qudus. I can't remember which one the Qudus was, but there is that kind of concept as well. So it's interesting to relate that Mullah Hussein was the fruit of Islam, and he's also known as a return of Muhammad in terms of qualities and attributes. So I thought it was a nice kind of relation there.
Thank you for sharing that, Bahan. Yeah, there are these characters, these archetypes that always come back, and certainly when we talk about the return of Christ, the prophecy of the return of Christ being fulfilled, we don't mean the actual body of Emmanuel, of Joshua bin Yosef. Of course, it's that spirit. So yeah, thank you very much, man. Before moving on to this next bit, so we've just been talking about Mullah Hussein, and one story which was recently brought back to my attention was this beautiful scene actually where Mullah Hussein is with one of his fellow countrymen, Haji Mumin Khorasani, and they're walking past, and Mumin basically says to Mullah Hussein, and says, look, this is your school, this is the school that you went to. And Mullah Hussein basically, he has no time for the school. He says, no, I don't want to see the school. I don't like the school. And he says, no, but this is the school that you learned. And he says, yes, forget the school. And he seems a little bit irked about seeing his school and understanding exactly why this is. And Mumin really doesn't understand. And then Mullah Hussein explains that it's very much because of him attending this school that he almost had the arrogance to argue with the Bab. Remember when the Bab starts explaining who he is and says these signs are manifest in me? Mullah Hussein has conversation with him back and forth. And he was saying, was that acquired knowledge that actually caused the problem? Whereas people such as Tahirih didn't have that issue. Qudus, remember, he sees the Bab purely from his gate. And sees such the humility of Mullah Hussein and the love that he has for the Bab, and vice versa, the love that's going on.
Thanks, Dave. Fahid pronounced in the Kitab-i-Ghan to be the unique and peerless figure of his age, a man of immense erudition and the most preeminent figure to enlist under the banner of the new faith, to whose talents and saintliness, to whose high attainments in the realm of science and philosophy, the Bab had testified in his
Dalail-e-Sabeh,
7 proofs, had already under similar circumstances been swept into the maelstrom of another upheaval, and was soon to quaff in his turn the cup drained by the heroic martyrs of Mazandaran. Hujjat, another champion of such conspicuous audacity, of unsubduable will, of remarkable originality and vehement zeal, was being swiftly and inevitably drawn into the fierce furnace whose flames had already enveloped Zanjan and its environs. The Bab's maternal uncle, the only father he had known since his childhood, his shield and support and the trusted guardian of both his mother and his wife, had, moreover, been sundered from him by the axe of the executioner in Tehran. No less than half of his chosen disciples, the letters of the living, had already preceded him in the field of martyrdom. Tahereh, though still alive, was courageously pursuing a course that was to lead her inevitably to her doom. A fast-ebbing life, so crowded with the accumulated anxieties, disappointments, treacheries, and sorrows of a tragic ministry, now moves swiftly towards its climax. The most turbulent period of the heroic age of the new dispensation was rapidly attaining its culmination. The cup of bitter woes which the herald of that dispensation had tasted was now full to overflowing. Indeed, he himself had already foreshadowed his own approaching death. In the Kitab-e-Panj Shan, one of his last works, he had alluded to the fact that the 6th Nowruz, after the declaration of his mission, would be the last he was destined to celebrate on earth. In his interpretation of the letter Ha, he had voiced his craving for martyrdom, while in the Ghayom al-Azma, he had actually prophesied the inevitability of such a consummation of his glorious career. 40 days before his final departure from Cherik, he had even collected all the documents in his possession and placed them, together with his pen case, his seals, and his rings, in the hands of Mullah Baghir, a letter of the living, whom he instructed to entrust them to Mullah Abdul Karim Ghazvani, surnamed Mirza Ahmad, who was to deliver them to Baha'u'llah in Tehran. While the convulsions of Mazandaran and Neyriz were pursuing their bloody course, the Grand Vizier of Nasruddin Shah, anxiously pondering the significance of these dire happenings and apprehensive of their repercussions on his countrymen, his government, and his sovereign, was feverishly revolving in his mind that fateful decision, which was not only destined to leave its indelible imprint on the fortunes of his country, but was to be fraught with such incalculable consequences for the destinies of the whole of mankind. The repressive measures taken against the followers of the Bab, he was by now fully convinced, had but served to inflame their zeal, steel their resolution, and confirm their loyalty to their persecuted faith. The Bab's isolation and captivity had produced the opposite effect to that which the Emir Nizam had confidently anticipated. Gravely perturbed, he bitterly condemned the disastrous leniency of his predecessor, Haji Mirza Agassi, which had brought matters to such a pass. A more drastic and still more exemplary punishment, he felt, must now be administered to what he regarded as abomination of heresy, which was polluting the civil and ecclesiastical institutions of the realm. Nothing short, he believed, of the extinction of the life of him who was the fountainhead of so odious a doctrine and the driving force behind so dynamic a movement could stem the tide that had wrought such havoc throughout the land.
So we understand that while the Bab is in Azerbaijan, he loses not only Mullah Hussein, not only Qudus, not only half the letters to the living and countless Babis, and he hears of these atrocities, he also loses his father figure, who from the age of 6, I believe, was looking after him, Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali. And he is now martyred, obviously, with the 7 martyrs of Tehran. And he was the shield to his mother and his wife as well. So imagine he's there and he knows that his mother and wife, who were protected by Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, has now been killed. And again, when Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali was being killed, people had rallied round, because he was a merchant, and many very affluent merchants had tried to pay the government, pay the forces that be to not kill him, and he refused. All 7 of these martyrs to Tehran, in fact, they marched with joy. Such was the expression of serenity on their face that the executioner was very confused. He'd been in the business of killing for many years, but all of a sudden these people are almost tore-offing and saying, please, no, let me go first, let me go first. And they had this joy. That's with the 7 martyrs anyway. We then hear the Bab in the Panshan has predicted about his martyrdom that's soon to come, and the Ghayom al-Azma, in the explanation of the letter Ha, all of these things, he's saying that 6 years after the declaration of his revelation, His Holiness the Bab knew full well and it's there and clear to be read. 40 days before his passing, he'd given a lot of his tablets and his seals and a bunch of his stuff to Mullah Baghir to go and give to Mirza Ahmad, Mirza Karim Ghazvini. The way in which he finds the Bab is mind-blowing, but he has this dream many years before where a dove talks to him and says, are you seeking the manifestation, lo the year 60? And then when he eventually meets the Bab says to him, "Are you seeking the manifestation?" And Karim Ghazvini just starts crying. He just breaks down and cries. So this incredible person, he ends up being one of the amanuenses of the Bab, who's then known as Mirza Ahmad, this person that I've mentioned previously, who is more or less solely responsible for us having the bulk of the writings we do of the Bab now. After this, we focus on the fact that Mirza Taghi, the new prime minister, again, who's taken over from Haji Mirza Agassi, wants to ramp things up, and he figures out the only way to try and deal with the Babis now is to try and put His Holiness the Bab to death.
The siege of Zanjan was still in progress when he, dispensing with an explicit order from his sovereign and acting independently of his counselors and fellow ministers, dispatched his order to Prince Hamzi Mirza, the Hishmatu Dawli, the governor of Azerbaijan, instructing him to execute the Bab. Fearing lest the infliction of such condign punishment in the capital of the realm would set in motion forces he might be powerless to control, he ordered that his captive be taken to Tabriz and there be done to death. Confronted with a flat refusal by the indignant prince to perform what he regarded as a flagitious crime, the Amir Nizam commissioned his own brother Mirza Hassan Khan to execute his orders. The usual formalities designed to secure the necessary authorization from the leading mujtahids of Tabriz were hastily and easily completed. Neither Mullah Mohammed Imamakhani, however, who had penned the Bab's death warrant on the very day of his examination in Tabriz, nor Haji Mirza Bakir, nor Mullah Murtaza Kuli, to whose houses their victim was ignominiously led by the Farash-e-Bashi, by order of the Grand Vizier, condescended to meet face to face their dreaded opponent. Immediately before and soon after this humiliating treatment meted out to the Bab, two highly significant incidences occurred, incidents that cast an illuminating light on the mysterious circumstances surrounding the opening phase of his martyrdom. The Farash Bashi had abruptly interpreted the last conversation which the Bab was confidentially having in one of the rooms of the barracks with his amanuensis Syed Hussein, and was drawing the latter aside and severely rebuking him when he was thus addressed by his prisoner. "Not until I have said to him all those things that I wish to say can any earthly power silence me. Though all the world be armed against me, yet shall it be powerless to deter me from fulfilling to the last word my intention." To the Christian Sam Khan, the colonel of the Armenian regiment, ordered to carry out the execution, who, seized with fear lest his act should provoke the wrath of God, had begged to be released from his duty imposed upon him, the Bab gave the following assurance: "Follow your instructions, and if your intention be sincere, the Almighty is surely able to relieve you of your perplexity." Sam Khan accordingly set out to discharge his duty. A spike was driven into a pillar which separated two rooms of the barracks facing the square. Two ropes were fastened to it from which the Bab and one of his disciples, the youthful and devout Mirza Muhammad Ali Zunuzi, surnamed Anis, who had previously flung himself at the feet of his master and implored that under no circumstances he be sent away from him, were separately suspended. The firing squad ranged itself in 3 files, each of 250 men. Each file in turn opened fire until the whole detachment has discharged its bullets. So dense was the smoke from the 750 rifles that the sky was darkened. As soon as the smoke had cleared away, the astounded multitude of about 10,000 souls who had crowded onto the roof of the barracks, as well as the tops of the adjoining houses, beheld a scene which their eyes could scarcely believe. The Bab had vanished from their sight. Only his companion remained, alive and unscathed, standing beside the wall on which they had been suspended. The ropes by which they had been hung alone were severed. "The Sayyid-e-Bab has gone from our sight," cried out the bewildered spectators. A frenzied search immediately ensued. He was found unhurt and unruffled in the very room he had occupied the night before, engaged in completing his interrupted conversation with his amanuensis. "I have finished my conversation with Syed Hussein," were the words with which the prisoner, so providentially preserved, greeted the appearance of the Farash Bashi. "Now you may proceed to fulfill your intention. recalling the bold assertion his prisoner had previously made. And shaken by so stunning a revelation, the Farash Bashi quitted instantly the scene and resigned his post. Sam Khan, likewise, remembering with feelings of awe and wonder the reassuring words addressed to him by the Bab, ordered his men to leave the barracks immediately and swore as he left the courtyard never again, even at the cost of his life, to repeat that act. Agha Janie Khamsi, colonel of the bodyguard, volunteered to replace him. On the same wall and in the same manner, the Bab and his companion were again suspended, while the new regiment formed in line and opened fire upon them. This time, however, their breasts were riddled with bullets and their bodies completely dissected, with the exception of their faces, which were but little marred. O wayward generation, were the last words of the Bab to the gazing multitude as the regiment prepared to fire its volley. Had you believed in me, every one of you would have followed the example of this youth, who stood in rank above most of you, and would have willingly sacrificed himself in my path. The day will come when you will have recognized me. That day I shall have ceased to be with you.
We know that Mirza Taghi Khan has come up with this plan where he wants the Bab to be taken from Jahrek to Tabriz to be executed. He asks Prince Hazem Mirza to deliver him. And he's the governor of Azerbaijan, and he says to him, please, will you bring him here? He refuses. He says, no, I don't understand. I've met His Holiness the Bab. I don't have any issue. I don't think this is a right course of action to do. So eventually, Mirza Taghi gets his brother, who's Mirza Hassan Khan, who is going to run through with it. So he's then taken to Tabriz, and in order for this to happen, the mujtahids had to agree. So we know that the one-eyed renegade, Mamaghani, was one of these mujtahids, and they couldn't even bear to look at the Bab in the face because they knew deep down what was going on was completely and utterly wrong. The Bab is then going to be executed. And just before he's executed, he's with some of his followers, and he says to all of them, he says, please, I'd rather die at the hands of you rather than the hands of the enemy. And this youth called Anis is the only one who will respond to this. And he says, yes, okay, I will do it. As a result, he's the one who's going to be martyred with the Bab. And he has a dream of the Bab beforehand, and he misses the Bab the first time in Tabriz. And that's a whole beautiful story of Anis anyway. So then it's going to be said that they're going to be tied together, and they're going to be shot. And there's going to be 750 bullets that are going to be rained upon his body. Samkhana Armani, the Armenian Samkhan, who was the Christian regiment, who was brought in to execute the Bab, he says to the Bab, look, I don't want to do this, and please alleviate me from this task. And the Bab says, if you are sincere, you'll be relieved from this duty. Now it's interesting, why did they bring a Christian regiment in? Because it said that actually the Ghaem will be martyred from the hands of the Muslims themselves. So they were trying to prove this to be wrong, and they're trying to say, no, a Christian regiment is going to do this, so look, this is clear and evident that this wasn't the Ghaem, this wasn't the Bab. So he's there, and he's in his cell, and he's talking to one of his amanuenses, Sayyid Hussein, and he's having a conversation, and then the Farash Bashi, the army regiment guy, comes along and essentially starts to try and rip the Bab away. The Bab says, look, I'm not done, I'm still engaged, I have more things to say, and they take him. They take the Bab, they hang him up, he's there with Anis, and lo and behold, these 750 bullets rain upon their bodies. When the smoke clears from the muskets, Anis is standing there by himself. This miracle seems to take place that 10,000 people witness, and then the Bab is found speaking back to his amanuenses. Samkhana Armani, the leader of this regiment, refuses and says, absolutely, I'm not doing this. I've tried one shot, that's it, I'm not doing. They had to then get a second regiment in, who was Agha Janie Khamsi, basically, and he came in with his team to carry out this horrendous martyrdom. Some people argue and they say, look, was it possible that 750 soldiers could have been in those army barracks? And it's said that there were 3 lines of 250. And actually, it's a very good question. This number of 750 is contested somewhat. In the Dawnbreakers, it does say 750. In other books and sources, it says the number was maybe 1,250 or 1,000. It seems that the number is even greater that was estimated. But at the end of the day, does it really matter, even if it was 5, whatever happens? This miracle takes place, but the Bab tells the Babis, he bans them from talking about his miracles. The last passage is just so beautiful as well. O wayward generation. These were the last words of the Bab. Had you believed in me, every one of you would have followed the example of this youth and would have stood in rank above most of you and would have willingly sacrificed himself in my path. The day will come when you will have recognized me. That day I shall have ceased to be with you.
Was the second general and army who came in, were they Muslim?
They were indeed.
I heard from a wonderful Baha'i who has passed that this was the answer, the Bab's act in escaping from that first volley, because his ministry echoed the ministry of Christ in many fashions. You know, we read where Christ was taken before the clergy and the governor, who all had to say, yes, execute him. And the same happened to the Bab. And this, she told me, this was Christ's answer to those that said, if you are a God, come down off the cross. And this act of the Bab proved the falsehood of those who were taunting Jesus. Because indeed, he did come down off the cross. And what was the result? They killed him anyway.
Thank you, Rick. Point well made. And as we go on in God Passes By, we'll actually see these countless similarities with His Holiness the Bab and His Holiness Christ.
Nor was this all. The very moment the shots were fired, a gale of exceptional violence arose and swept over the city. From noon till night, a whirlwind of dust obscured the light of the sun and blinded the eyes of the people. In Shiraz, an earthquake, foreshadowed in no less weighty a book than the Revelation of St. John, occurred in 1268 AH, which threw the whole city into turmoil and wrought havoc amongst its people, a havoc that was greatly aggravated by the outbreak of cholera, by famine, and other afflictions. In that same year, no less than 250 of the firing squad that had replaced Sam Khan's regiment met their death, together with their officers, in a terrible earthquake, while the remaining 500 suffered 3 years later as a punishment for their mutiny, the same fate as that which their hands had inflicted upon the Bab. To ensure that none of them had survived, they were riddled with a second volley, after which their bodies, pierced with spears and lances, were exposed to the gaze of the people of Tabriz. The prime instigator of the Bab's death, the implacable Amir Nizam, together with his brother, his chief accomplice, met their death within 2 years of that savage act. On the evening of the very day of the Bab's execution, which fell on the 9th of July, 1850, 28th of Shaban, 1266 AH, during the 31st year of his age, and the 7th of his ministry, the mangled bodies were transferred from the courtyard of the barracks to the edge of the moat outside the gate of the city. 4 companies, each consisting of 10 sentinels, were ordered to keep watch in turn over them. On the following morning, the Russian consul in Tabriz visited the spot and ordered the artist who had accompanied him to make a drawing of the remains as they lay beside the moat. In the middle of the following night, a follower of the Bab, Haji Sulaiman Khan, succeeded through the instrumentality of a certain Haji Allah Yar in removing the bodies to the silk factory owned by one of the believers of Milan, and laid them the next day in a specially made wooden casket, which he later transferred to a place of safety. Meanwhile, the mullahs were boastfully proclaiming from the pulpits that whereas the holy body of the Immaculate Imam would be preserved from beasts of prey and from all creeping things, this man's body had been devoured by wild animals. No sooner had the news of the transfer of the remains of the Bab and of his fellow sufferer been communicated to Baha'u'llah than he ordered that the same Sulayman Khan to bring them to Tehran, where they were taken to the Imam Zadeh Hassan, from whence they were removed to different places until the time when, in pursuance of Abdul Baha's instructions, they were transferred to the Holy Land and were permanently and ceremoniously laid to rest by him in a specially erected mausoleum on the slopes of Mount Carmel. Thus ended a life which posterity will recognize as standing at the confluence of 2 universal prophetic cycles: the Adamic cycle stretching back as far as the first dawnings of the world's recorded religious history, and the Baha'i cycle, destined to propel itself across the unborn reaches of time for a period of no less than 5,000 centuries. The apotheosis in which such a life attained its consummation marks, as already observed, the culmination of the most heroic phase of the heroic age of the Baha'i dispensation. It can, moreover, be regarded in no other light except as the most dramatic, the most tragic event transpiring within the entire range of the first Baha'i century. Indeed, it can be rightly acclaimed as unparalleled in the annals of the lives of all the founders of the world's existing religious systems. So momentous an event could hardly fail to arouse widespread and keen interest even beyond the confines of the land in which it had occurred. A true God-man is the verdict of a famous British traveler and writer. The finest product of his country is the tribute paid him by a noted French publicist. That Jesus of the age, a prophet and more than a prophet, is the judgment passed by a distinguished English divine. The most important religious movement since the foundation of Christianity is the possibility that was envisaged for the faith the Bab had established by that far-famed Oxford scholar, the late master of Balliol. Many persons from all parts of the world, is Abdu'l-Baha's written assertion, set out for Persia and began to investigate wholeheartedly the matter. The Tsar of Russia, a contemporary chronicler, has written, had even shortly before the Bab's martyrdom instructed the Russian consul in Tabriz to fully inquire into and report the circumstances of so startling a movement, a commission that could not be carried out in view of the Bab's execution. In countries as remote as those of Western Europe, an interest no less profound was kindled and spread with great rapidity to literary, artistic, diplomatic, and intellectual circles. All Europe, attests the above-mentioned French publicist, was stirred to pity and indignation. Among the literateurs of my generation, in the Paris of 1890, the martyrdom of the Bab was still as fresh a topic as had been the first news of his death. He wrote poems about him. Sarah Bernhardt entreated Catulle Mendes for a play on the theme of this historic tragedy. A Russian poetess, member of the Philosophic, Oriental, and Bibliological Societies of St. Petersburg, published in 1903 a drama entitled The Bab, which a year later was played in one of the principal theaters of that city, was subsequently given publicity in London, was translated into French in Paris and into German by the poet Fiedler, was presented again soon after the Russian Revolution in the Folk Theater in Leningrad, and succeeded in arousing the genuine sympathy and interest of the renowned Tolstoy, whose eulogy of the poem was later published in the Russian press.
After the horrific martyrdom of His Holiness the Bab in Tabriz, we know that there was a huge storm that took place. There's never been one like that. There was this earthquake that's spoken in the Revelation of St. John's. This prophesies this huge earthquake that's going to take place. Of the 750 people that were responsible for the death, Agha Janeh Khamseh, him and his regiment, 250 of them are crushed, but then they die in an earthquake. I believe the wall falls on top of them. The other 500 are, as a result of mutiny, shot, killed in the same way the Bab was. We know that the Prime Minister, Mirza Taghi Khan, dies very soon after, as does his brother being the one who transported the Bab from Shahred to Tabriz. The Bab, of course, was martyred 9th of July 1850 and was 31 years of age. The body was then taken and was left outside the moat. This body was taken from the moat by none other than Haji Suleiman Khan and Haji Alayar. The story that's given on the other side is that the bodies was eaten by dogs. We know that there's a portrait actually by a Russian diplomat who was drawn the body of a Bab in the moat. It's something that I've been trying to track down, but as of yet, I'm not able to find it. So if anyone's got any information, please post a link in YouTube and let us know if that does at all come up. Baha'u'llah then asks for the body to be moved, and it's moved around, and Abdu'l-Baha is the one who's really orchestrating this. We know that the body eventually was moved around. There's a fantastic book called Journey to a Mountain, which deals with the moving of the Bab's body, where it ends up, obviously, in none other than Haifa, on Mount
Who was the author, Dave?
It's a very good question. Very good question indeed. The author's name escapes me slightly. Would you like to tell us?
No, it escapes me as well, actually. Genuinely,
Michael Day. Michael Day.
Actually, I think I remember. I think it may be Michael Day.
Thank you
very much, Nabil. Thank you very much. The Bab is basically standing at this position in between the end of one complete cycle and a new cycle. And it's amazing how this explanation on the Surah Balash, just this first letter V, which I think there was 200 pages, if I'm not mistaken, that were written about this, what the significance of this is. We then hear of all these different people after the Bab's death who were completely and utterly enamored with the Bab. We know the Tsar of Russia was investigating. Western Europe had basically become a light. There were poems by Sarah Bernhardt. There were plays in Leningrad and in Germany, everywhere. So really, once the Bab has passed away, there's this ripple effect that takes place across Russia and Europe. And we know that Tolstoy even gets involved and is very much touched in this. Leo Tolstoy, the philosopher.
It would indeed be no exaggeration to say that nowhere in the whole compass of the world's religious literature, except in the Gospels, do we find any record relating to the death of any of the religious founders of the past, comparable to the martyrdom suffered by the Prophet of Shiraz. So strange, so inexplicable a phenomenon, attested by eyewitnesses, corroborated by men of recognized standing, and acknowledged by government as well as unofficial historians among the people who had sworn undying hostility to the Babi faith, may be truly regarded as the most marvelous manifestation of the unique potentialities with which a dispensation promised by all the dispensations of the past had been endowed. The passion of Jesus Christ, and indeed his whole public ministry alone, offer a parallel to the mission and the death of the Bab, a parallel which no student of comparative religion can fail to perceive or ignore. In the youthfulness and meekness of the inaugurator of the Babi dispensation, in the extreme brevity and the turbulence of his public ministry, in the dramatic swiftness with which that ministry moved towards its climax, in the apostolic order which he instituted and the primacy which he conferred upon one of its members, in the boldness of his challenge to the time-honored conventions, rites and laws which had been woven into the fabric of the religion he himself had been born into, in the role which an officially recognized and firmly entrenched religious hierarchy played as chief instigator of the outrages which he was made to suffer, in the indignities heaped upon him, in the suddenness of his arrest, in the interrogation to which he was subjected, in the derision poured and the scourging inflicted upon him, in the public affront he sustained, and finally in his ignominious suspension before the gaze of a hostile multitude. In all these, we cannot fail to discern a remarkable similarity to the distinguishing features of the career of Jesus Christ.
There's a whole bunch of similarities that are brought up between His Holiness the Bab and with Christ. We can go through them one by one and try and understand them, but I think they pretty much speak for themselves.
O Lord, unto thee I repair for refuge, and toward all thy signs I set my heart. O Lord, whether travelling or at home, and in my occupation or in my work, I place my whole trust in thee. Grant me then thy sufficing help, so as to make me independent of all things, O thou who art unsurpassed in thy mercy. Bestow upon me my portion, O Lord, as thou pleasest, and cause me to be satisfied with whatsoever thou hast ordained for me. Thine is the absolute authority to command. The Father.